I'm happy to share. It was such an experience, and especially because so many are gone. And yet, under the direction of Marshall, because he's still carrying the torch, they're still able to keep this sound and the music alive. And then Tara, such a blessing. And of course, Elson.
Yeah. And Michael, I think about. And
Michael, Michael.
A little bit, I don't know, how's his health, or his knee was messed. I haven't really been in touch.
Oh, he got a transplant, but he was doing a lot with Kool in the Gang. But yes, Michael, Cecil Brooks, but Michael was there, right, way back. But then he also had the Kool in the Gang thing, and then, which is wonderful. And just, I know Cecil came in later, but he's been very consistent. And Stewart, saxophone player.
James? I don't know him.
Yeah, James. Yeah, James. Yeah, James.
Came on later after I think maybe even
right.
a year. Or,
yeah, he came later, but they've been able to keep that sound alive. And Marshall's history was in the Army. He studied at the Sorbonne. He stayed there. And just to be able to keep that sound and because he had written so much when I was in the orchestra, I didn't know that some of the tunes he had written. And because what did I know? I didn't know anything. But it was just always a new surprise.
Well, you found out. You got your crash course there.
I got a whole bunch of stuff. And life, being in New York, and Marshall, because he was so wise, he taught me, instead of going somewhere and being the fat chicken that gets cooked and put in the pot, sit back and watch. Then you see who the players are. So much wisdom coming from this, just my experience and being with him and seeing him. And he's so brilliant, but you would never know because he's so low key. It's not about him, it's always about the music. What a life that he's been able to spend so much of his life doing what he loves.
And he's still going. This is almost even more incredible. It's not about the numbers and the age, but that's really something for the history.
Yes.
And the mystery. It's both.
And the mystery, right.
So here I want to ask about the name, which is actually very funny because in this, it's just a book and it's a very good effort to organize the information and document a lot of details. So you're listed in there, by the way. So it is, I think also it was printed all over the place with an O on Holten with an O-N, okay? But then not only that, the way you're listed in this book, okay, you look up and it says, refer to Wisteria El Moondew, and it's under M for Moondew, actually, which is very funny. So just tell me about the name. How did that come up amongst the space ethnic voices, if you will?
I'm a child of the 60s. So I'm a child of the 60s. Holten was the most common name, and so it was O-N. But when I actually did do some research, which I can't remember everything, is way back here. There were only 3 Holtens when I was coming up as a kid, and it originated somewhere in Europe. But my name was Holten. And so that's what I know about Holten. Holten was our name. And then Wisteria, being a child of the 60s, I'm like, oh my, I met the band. Oh, and one thing, when Sun Ra, I wanted to say this earlier, so hold that thought, Wisteria. I was trying to figure out what Sun Ra was about. It was like the music, and then he had the message, and then one day he came out with this, like, we were in Sacramento, and I had driven up, which was an hour and something drive, and he had this crystal ball looking thing, and he took it, and he did the drama with the piano and the whole thing, and I'm like, oh, what is it about? What is he saying? And then he gave me this book, which was a gift, because when he first came up, and the guy from New York had them come and stay at his house, and it was about fairies and different kinds of fairies. And I'm trying to put all this together. What does this mean? So then I thought it was the occult. I actually started doing tarot reading, and I had a crystal ball, and I later found out that stuff was not, there's spirits in that stuff. Actually, Richard told me the first time, and then I finally got it through some other experience. But that's how that was what, trying to figure out what he was about. But no, it was really about the music and Egypt and outer space, and he was ahead of his time. And harmony and learning how to follow your intuition. But the name Wisteria, again, was a child of the 60s. I'm like, oh, Wisteria. So I called myself Wisteria, and somehow El Moondew So that's how that came about. It just came to me out of the ether. And then Marshall would call me Moondew. A lot of them would just refer to me as, hey.
So that was before, or that was at that time when you were connected with Sun Ra that the name came up?
That was at the time when he came for the 6-month residency.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah. So in this particular book, you're listed under M for Moondew, by the way. So that's kind of funny. Okay. Then, so along this theme, I guess I'll just jump to this inquiry. So in terms of first about the audiences, it seems, broadly speaking, let's say this is way oversimplified, but maybe one could say there were two types of audiences or segments. One, the Black community of like jazz, energy music, fire music, and which cross-sected, let's say, with the counterculture, and then of course sort of the white hippies, and then the psychedelic and the funk rock and this crowd. So I'm just curious, first, what were your observation or experiences, maybe already before, but sort of going through and then experiencing, especially the audiences of Sun Ra? How was that mix?
When I was in school in the 60s and we played a gig in, I think it was at San Francisco State, and the audience was primarily hippie. And I just was like looking at them, they were doing all these, it was like, and you have to understand, it was at a time when we're all in outer space in terms of our minds. And I have a very active imagination. And so I'm looking at, wow, this music is bringing inner beings out of people because everybody is moving in all kinds of ways. So my head was, I had taken LSD twice. Yeah, twice. So my head was out there. I was an artist, so my head was out there. But I did also have my roots in the Black community. I didn't really separate it. It was just different. I know one time we played a gig in San Francisco. Wait a minute, was that San Francisco? Yeah, two occasions. In San Francisco, he did this thing and he was talking about 666, which is the devil's number. And the Black folks in the audience got up, it was in Hunters Point, got up and walked out. At that time, I didn't know much. I later became a Christian because I had a supernatural experience. But I didn't know much, and I saw these people leaving in anger or feeling offended. And then we went to Chicago and he did a whole Cosmo drama on 666. And everybody was listening. They were just listening, trying to get what he was saying. So it just depended on what community he was talking to. People are rooted in they're grounded in whatever their roots are. So, but yeah, he definitely affected people. Nobody was passive.
No doubt. And so you mentioned that you had been at Slugs also. So I guess I'm just curious, what was the scene there in terms of the, let's say, demographics or whatever else? Because maybe that was different than the hippie crowd, but I don't know.
No, my memory is I think it was more African American, but I can't really tell you because I wasn't focused on that at all. It really wasn't. What got me with Slugs was the fact that we were performing until 4 o'clock. Sometimes the guys would nod on the stage and then all of a sudden you hit a chord and they were awake. That was my main. Yeah, I didn't. In the back here, it seems like Slugs was African-American, but the jazz people were into the music. The hippie people were into the music. We left one gig, we were in Europe, and then we went to Woodstock. I think it was Woodstock, which was an all hippie crowd. It didn't matter. The music, and not only that, what amazed me when I left here is that he was out here. Sun Ra knew what the people wanted. And he was out here playing psychedelics and all kind of outer space music, which is where everybody was. I'm saying out here, not in Mexico, but when we were in California. And then when we went to the East Coast, it was standards. And I'm like, wow, what's up here? I know about standards because my father was a World War II vet. So, we was listening to all of that, the big bands. And so that was just a wake-up call for me in terms of the range of music that he played. But with the exception of when he was talking about six, most of the crowd was in it, and Slugs was just an adventure because we stayed awake because we never knew. when our moment was going to come. And then there were some gigs that he did outside in that neighborhood. We did some outdoor gigs, but the people were just alive. The music was alive. The people were alive. The band was very people friendly. You know what I loved about Sun Ra? My cousin, by the way, passed away, Dorothy Donegan. Dorothy Donegan, she was my cousin. So I met her. And then we were playing, I think it was the Blue Note. We were playing somewhere and she walked in. And I said, oh, that's my cousin. So I went to see her and she found out I was playing with Sun Ra, and she actually got on Sun Ra's tour bus once because she wanted to see how her cousin was traveling. But my point is, she was great, but so regular, never arrogant. Same thing with the orchestra. Fantastic musicians, all this talent, played all over the world, but people, never arrogant, never proud, nothing. And that was also a lesson for me. Seeing the greats, and yet they're humble, they're kind to the audience or whatever it was needed. They had diplomacy, wisdom, and wisdom is, when I'm saying wisdom, I mean in the moment, just knowing what to do, what to say. Like with June, we were at her house one day and a man came knocking on the door. He needed some food. And where I was from in California, you just say, bye. No, no, I don't have any, but I can direct you down the street, and they're helping people. And that one experience just touched my heart and changed me. So and because I was so green, being surrounded by them really turned me into who I am today. When having that traveling, I can go anywhere and I'm not judging people. It's like being where you are, coming to Mexico. It's, you know what? I need to find out what's going on here. I can't bring my experience here and impose it on the people because then I'm outside. But when I take the time to step back and get the lay of the land, as Marshall would say, then I can find out how I can integrate myself within the culture. And just a wonderful experience.
In terms of the Black community and also what was going on, actually, I just read this book, or I'm almost done with this book it's called Harlem 69. It's about a lot of different things, especially like soul music, but a lot of the like Black Panther kind of stuff. And I'm just broadly, again, speaking in terms of civil rights and Black power and community self-determination. What was, I don't know if you have any thoughts about Sun Ra's interaction with or response to the cultural dimensions, community type stuff, and if anything particular, because a lot of it's obvious in terms of music and the message. But what was your experience or view at the time?
The Black community loved him, and because I was working in Hunters Point, which is a Black neighborhood in the Fillmore, and he came talking about Black people going to outer space. Suddenly, he's a master musician, but he also was smart regarding everything. And so his message went from, okay, there's outer space, and that was in the 60s when the whole Black power thing was going on. But then it was Black people going into outer space. And it was Black people, if we make an affirmation, if two of us come together and we ask for anything, if we believe it, then we'll have it. Whatever was going on in the culture, he was able to adapt to it. And there was no hate speech. I don't believe I ever heard any hate speech. It was about, because African Americans were having such a struggle, and we still are. But so he just incorporated that struggle and made it a positive thing. And then when everything started fading down on that in terms of it being in headlines and everything, it went into the outer space. Space is just into the realms of the music again. So it's like whatever the tide was, he could ride it, be with it, and still he wasn't destroyed by it. The music held its authority or its power. And it was just like you adapt, whatever's going on in the universe, you adapt to it.
So there's, timing-wise, you were already around with them, at least maybe on the West Coast, before the moon landing in '69, is that right? And then June, they did that tune that June sang with the Walking on the Moon. And then I guess another thing which just came up, I knew this tune for a long time, but it was in this book that I just mentioned, which was the Gil Scott-Heron, Whitey on the Moon. And so I'm just curious, like, if that was registering in terms of that tension, let's say, and then speeding up, not too much, but over to the over to Oakland and the film, the Space is a Place movie. So I'm just curious what's coming up there in terms of the Black people in space.
Just trying to wake Black people up to what's going on in the world. The whole world. And so it's waking up. These people are walking on the moon. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? Are you looking at the future? They're looking at the future. You need to be looking at the future too. Plus his motif was already outer space. So it was, I remember the movie because we were there when he did the Outer Space Employment Agency and all of that. I was so swept up into what was going on with him. I remember being at San Francisco State and I knew something was going down, and came out and saw the police mounted on horses. And I was also in a theater group that was going to take integrated theater to the South. And I had a wake-up call in my head saying, wait a minute, people in the South know more about this than we do. I didn't go, and then the 3 young men were killed. So I feel like I was just absorbing what was going on. Yes, I was aware of the movement. I was doing Black theater with children in Hunters Point. And then from that came my own writings, which when I wrote plays for kids, which didn't really deal with white folks, it dealt with Black folks. It dealt with who we are, what we've contributed to the world. It wasn't hate-based. It was built on supporting and building up African-American youth in their minds and letting them be educators for the community. That was my whole point with my theater. Teach them about our culture and history, because in joining the orchestra and going back east is when I really started getting my education in terms of scholars. I was with the movement on the West Coast, but I got my education on the East Coast. And I was reading and reading from historians. I have a Bible that was put out by Howard University with Asa Hilliard and John Henry Clark and all these historians who broke that down into Africa and what. So all of that changed me, as that was a deep change. And then when I came back, I took that gift and I wrote it into plays, and I had this big vision of growing up a group of young African Americans that could go out and educate the community, some of which was very idealistic. And some of it was very naive, because I understand the mechanisms of the government and the oppression subtly and in much more ways than I did then, but still the youth that I touched. And then at one point, Sun Ra came out and played at the theater where my children were. We had a theater that we were housed in, and they came out and played in the theater. And one of them is 50-something now, and so that experience impacted his life. They were all impacted. And then I did a play so it was outer space, the Egyptian motif, because of the pharaohs and everything. And then I did a play where they dealt with one of the young men. We had thrones with the pharaohs, with the queen, with all the Egyptian deities, dance and all of that. But it was still coming from Sun Ra, what I learned from him. So my wish was to pass that down because it had impacted me. I was like riding in the spaceship and observing and being impacted by my fellow space cadets, and also having that lens to look at the world, which is a unique position to be in. And there are people, if you're not living inside that, it's a totally different experience. To me, they're like layers of the Sun Ra experience, because we lived in the house. We saw the kitchen. We had some of Sun Ra's fried green tomatoes. That's family. And then there are degrees of experience. So you can be in the cockpit with the captain, and then you can be cadets here, and you can be cadets here, and you can be in the space tower. You see what I'm saying? Which is not judgment on any of it, but that's what my experience was, and that's what my experience is, looking and listening to what's going on. And that legacy is still going, and that people are so drawn to the whole experience, those that may have been alive when he was alive and those that came onto it later. It's just the strength of the music and the musicians who were so dedicated.
Amazing. So beautiful. I'm just soaking up the story, so thank you. I'll just jump over to the studio, like making records. What was, and also any particular stories, either at home or on the road or in the studio or whatever, particular shows, whatever jumps out. But first off, like especially, okay, for me, it's the sessions that yielded the Space is a Place album and also Discipline 27 too. Especially like the singing on there is, and the mix, all of that it's like pretty special for me personally anyway, and I know for a lot of people. So I'm just curious if there's any pictures that come from there.
Again, with me, it was like, because I was so young and there's a word, it's on the inexperienced in so many ways. I'm following the leader. So when he said, get up and this is your part, then I got up and that was my part. And I'm glad I could do it. I love to sing, but it wasn't something that I studied, except with June. And Richard thought I had a voice and was gonna took me to Barry Harris one day. And Marshall actually gave me flute lessons. So I still have a flute here. So I was learning music, but so I was following the leader. Whatever he said to do, I was doing it to the best that I possibly could. And that included the recording sessions when we were on stage and we'd have a mic. He gave me a tambourine and said, okay. Just like he gave June a violin and it's okay, this is it. Whatever it did, whatever it was, he saw something in us to pull that out of us. But two little stories. When we were, I think we wasn't in Ruthie's Inn, we were playing at a small club in Berkeley on Shattuck Avenue. And he paid somebody not to play. I don't know what they did, I don't remember, but they were high up on the totem pole, not Gilmore or anything like that. But he said, no, you're gonna sit out and I'm gonna pay you not to play. But that person had to sit on stage and not play, so therein lies the rub. And then when we did Saturday Night Live, you know that story?
I know the performance, what was shown.
We were supposed to play in 2 segments. And Sun Ra is his own leader. And so we didn't do that. We played one because he wanted whatever his feeling was, and with the continuity of the music, no, we played one whole long segment and that was it. And they were having a fit. They were having a fit, but he did it his way, so.
Sure did. Always
did what he needed to do, so. Anyway, regarding the music, that I just remember I posted that picture of June and Cheryl and Ruth and myself doing that. I think that was the recording.
It's precious.
And I've got some albums here from the 70s and maybe the late 60s that Alton Abraham, I've got 37 albums. Because I came back here, I was in the States for so long, you know, that I came back and I'm dusting stuff off. But yeah, he was prolific just in terms of turning out the music. And so many people behind the scenes. Alton was a force. We were afraid of Alton. We were like, Chicago, man got a gun. And his buddy, I can't remember his buddy's name, but they were to have this big reputation. And then I met him and they were so cool. But the East Coast vibe, Chicago to me is an East Coast vibe. So that vibe is totally different. And they were living life large. And then he gave me that sewing machine, such a kind, always kind.
That was Alton that gave you the sewing machine?
Yeah.
I didn't catch that before.
He gave me the sewing machine because I had sewn this costume for Sun Ra by hand, and all of a sudden I got a sewing machine in New Jersey.
Amazing. But so when you passed through Chicago is when you met Alton. It wouldn't have been, he stayed there, I guess.
He stayed there, but he came. We definitely met him in Chicago. This is years ago, but I seem to remember him back here meeting us somewhere else too. But it's fuzzy, I can't, just a shadow of it. But no, I definitely met him in Chicago. He was a force to be, we were somewhere though, and he was there. I don't know if it was, it might have been in Mexico when we did Mexico City, the story of Mexico City and how we played that gig, and the promoter left. And Richard had to get us gigs to get him out. Are you familiar with that? we played a gig at Mexico City. The Mexican government had just murdered some of the students for protesting. This was in the protest era. And our promoter, whoever brought us there from Mexico, we had trouble getting visas. And so we played at the big theater, the Hidalgo Theater. And then we had some other gigs. We were there, must have been about a week. And he left. We played those 2 gigs. I remember sitting outside waiting for our visas. I don't know what the problem was, but whatever it was, it spooked him. We played the Hidalgo and then he was gone. And Richard took up the ball and had us playing in different gigs. The girls flew out. The fellows took a bus from Mexico City back east, but Sun Ra made sure that the women flew out.
They took a bus from Mexico City back east. Wow.
That story just came up. I remembered it. It was, and Richard, I don't know how he did it. He was working in the background. And so we got gigs. We were still able to stay at the nice hotel that we were in. All of our needs. Wow. Drama.
Did you guys get to go to any pyramids over there, or that wasn't in the mix?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. Chapultepec. I think there was a song, Chapultepec Park. Yeah, we did. And it was interesting because the pyramids were so different from the Egyptian ones, which led me to read the history of the Egyptian priests coming from Egypt into Veracruz, which is not where we actually were, but a lot of the rites that the Olmecs did came from the Egyptian priests, and a lot of the ceremonies with embalming and whatnot, that they got it from the inner chip because the water route, there was a water route that went there. But yes, we did walk those pyramids also. It was interesting. And the people were very receptive. Everywhere we went, pretty much the people were receptive.
Wow. Okay. Hopefully this is actually still the beginning of the conversation. So thank you again for taking some time on a Sunday, and maybe just some closing thoughts on this chapter of the legacy of Sun Ra, and a little more on, again, the kind of the miracle and the force of nature and the cosmos that is Marshall Allen and the orchestra today. Yeah. I'm
happy to have this interview. Thank you very much. And I'm also happy that I was able to go to Oregon because I think they came to San Francisco. I went on the tour with them, the Centennial Tour in 2014. Then they came to San Francisco in 2017. Then the pandemic hit. You came through Zurich. In fact, on the Centennial date, exactly, you were in Zurich. I was in the front row. I was on the tour, one of the dancers. It was a lot, it was a lot going on. Yeah, Elson brought me out, so that was great. That was magnificent, yeah, really. Truly. And the thing of it is, the music is inside of me. And those of us who have spent any time really with the orchestra, it does not leave. I can't even explain it. It's just being reignited. And then when they came in, was it 2017? I'm on the cover of San Francisco Jazz. And 2019, I came back here. I don't know if it was 2017. And then, which was wonderful, being on the stage again and with Tara. But then being with them in Oregon and having the grief that I had and just the power. There's not even words of how that, because my husband died suddenly. I had no idea. He dropped at my feet, said my name, and that was it. And it was like those blow up balloons. All of a sudden, a blow up balloon, that was a really metaphysical moment. All the air went out. And so I had the shock and dealing with all of that. And as I said, Sue's a good friend for many years. And she was like, and she had said, do you want to do this tour? And I was like, no, because we were going to leave for Mexico. And then all of a sudden that happened. And I said, okay, let's go. And so that music, it was in my mind, I'm seeing like dark, crumbled pieces of mud that have been hardened. I felt like inside me. But when we went there, all of that melted. the hope. I don't know what the hope, I don't know what that was, there's no name for it. Life, that's what it was. That music ignited me. So something inside of me had died also, and the music ignited life and gave me joy and lifted me up. I told them to. And lifted me up out of that despair so I could move on. And so the music itself, music is alive, sound is alive, thoughts are alive. We have to be careful what we think, because thoughts go out, then they come out of your mouth and they come back manifested. I learned that from Sun Ra. Everything is alive. Anyway, the precious gift of that music, and for Marshall being blessed with the years that he has and the passion that he has. And then again, the fellas in the band that have been there, and then Tara, that is not a coincidence. Tara coming into the orchestra when she did, playing a violin and having the vocals and the drama to bring it forth, just life inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks again, Judith. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. All right. Thank you for having me.